Welcome to this first webinar of 2023. And we're going to be talking about the EU Digital Identity Wallet Initiative and Rollout. First of all, a slight introduction for those who are not familiar. TDL is a membership association. We're made up of SMEs, universities, research institutes, and large corporates. We exchange experience, share market and technology insights, and the objective has been to make digital services in Europe trustworthy, reliable, and safe. We have a particular interest in the protection of the rights of citizens, and we work in the area of policy, technology, and services. And if you're not a member, and most of you are, you're very welcome to join. We have been around, as Amadeo was just saying, since 2009 as a consortium, and we became an association in 2014. So, moving on. So the agenda today is in two parts. The first part I'm going to take, and I'm going to be looking at the regulation and the initiative, the regulation being EIDAS. And the second part is going to be handled by Chandran, who is the CTO and co-founder of iGrant.io, a leading Swedish SME working in this space. And Lal is going to go into some more detail about the digital wallet. He's going to do a demo and talk about some use cases. And he's going to talk about the ARF, and we'll talk about what the ARF is later on, the architectural reference framework. Okay, so EIDAS. EIDAS is the Electronic Identification, Authentication, and Trust Services Regulation. It started off really well. It had been coming for quite a long time. It was adopted in 2014, and then through a series of processes through the European Union, the trilogues with the different institutions, it became applicable in 2015 and then became mandatory from the end of September 2018. That's 4.5 years ago. And the key principle was so there were two parts to this, the electronic identification and the trust services. And EIDAS was very much triggered by the requirement for trust services, electronic signatures, and electronic seals. And on the right-hand side, you see the tick box for the Commission's tick box for certified trust services. And the intention from the EID perspective was that there would be mutual recognition amongst all member states and between member states to access public services. So if you wanted to create if you wanted to access a government service in Austria and you were from Croatia, you could do that using EID because it'd be mutually recognized between the member states. Now that doesn't seem quite so exciting, but at the time it was considered a real breakthrough because at the first time we'd seen something like an electronic identity provided for the citizens, provided from a government point of view across the board in Europe. The European Commission were very excited and they produced some lovely marketing material as exemplified here, and demonstrated all the benefits, how you could use the identity part and the trust services part in conjunction to improve your business and your business processes, and to make interaction with governmental services so much easier than it had been before. And everybody got very excited. Well, all the identirati got excited about it. Questionable whether anybody outside the identirati actually knew about it, because not least there were other initiatives going on in many of the countries, particularly in the Nordics. There's Bank ID, And in many of the other member states, there were other types of initiatives that were in existence that were not necessarily EIDAS compliant. So it started off with a lot of enthusiasm and goodwill, but then what? It became apparent after a few years that it wasn't meeting the expectations of the digital single market, or promoting or meeting the expectations of the Commission and those who had initiated it. And the take-up amongst the member states has been very low. Up until today, we have 14%, statistics over on the right-hand side. And part of this was it didn't provide the provision for the use of identification for private services, and it led to differences, lack of interoperability between countries. So they created this timeline, as I've mentioned some of these dates already, with the intention of making a review in 2020. And in fact, the Commission evaluated the regulatory framework and ran a consultation to get feedback on what was needed to increase the uptake of trust services and electronic ID in Europe. And then, as a result of that, we had a proposal to build on the EIDAS framework with the intention of giving 80% of EU citizens the possibility of using a digital identity to access public services by 2030, and to do so cross-border. It would allow European citizens to, through the framework, to identify and authenticate themselves without having to resort to commercial providers. And this would raise trust, security, and privacy concerns. The Commission also adopted a recommendation to design a toolbox, which took place last year to support the framework to avoid fragmentation. It got the support of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and crucially, it allowed all EU citizens and residents to use a personal digital wallet of both online and offline, public and private services across the EU, something which hadn't taken place before. So it introduced the EIDAS 2.0, introduced the concept of a European digital identity wallet that allowed users to exchange electronic attestations of attributes authenticated by qualified trust service providers, and gave them more control over their personal data. And the intention is that within a year and a half or 2 years after the regulation comes into force, and we'll come on to that later, all member states have to make a digital identity wallet available to every citizen who wants one. And for users, the adoption of the wallet will be voluntary. It'd be very hard to see how you could make it mandatory for everybody in the European Union to adopt one of these things. So the Commission have very generously said it's not mandatory. But it is potentially transformative for individuals, for citizens, both for governments and for businesses. It's a massive set of challenges and opportunities that really will catapult the whole idea of identity solutions much further than it's ever been before, certainly in Europe and probably elsewhere as well. And on a scale that we've not, which is really hard to get your head around, given the scale of the European citizenship and the number of businesses and services that are going to be affected. So in order to make this happen, there are 4 work strands. There's the legislative process, pushing the EIDAS regulation, which underpins the framework, through the various different discussions, consultations, and institutions, the technical standards of the wallet. Besides the common toolbox I mentioned a moment ago, there's the architecture and reference framework, which Lal is going to talk to, and various other standards and specifications in the use of the wallet. There is the Commission agreed to set up large-scale pilots, and they were going to look at a number of different use cases to proof of technology, proof of concept for the wallet, and then finally a reference application based on the technical standards associated with the toolbox. So there are these 4 work strands, and we'll touch on all of these. So the digital wallet contractor, the Commission at the end of last year announced a contract for the development and support for a EUDI wallet implementation with a consortium who are going to provide it. And the consortium is led by Netcompany, Intrasoft, and Citalis, affectionately known as SciSky, together with a number of experts, some contractors. And they have been working with the Commission on providing a wallet reference implementation with the intention of a first software release by May or June this year, which is more likely to be June. So that is fairly soon, fairly exciting. In the meantime, we don't have the reference implementation. So the next thing is to get the ball rolling for large-scale consortia, kicked off a set of 2-year pilot projects on the 1st of April, with a view to realizing the vision for citizens and businesses to have digital identity. And some of the requirements of the LSPs is that all projects have to integrate with the development of the reference application that I just mentioned, and to be developed on the basis of the ARF associated with the toolbox. And in addition to be aligning with the ARF, they have to demonstrate the successful integration of APIs with the reference application, and ensuring that the various different service providers, the EAAs and QEAAs, these are the qualified electronic attestation of attribute providers, are able to connect. So this is needless to say, a massive interoperability exercise across 4 large-scale consortia. The objectives of the LSPs are to support the piloting of digital wallets by the member states, because ultimately the member states and their stakeholders are going to be responsible for rolling this out within 2 years of the regulation. Promoting the development and deployment of use cases. So each of the LSPs have a different set of use cases which they're working on. Some of them overlap a little bit, but they basically are demonstrating that the implementation and all the different criteria associated with it will work with in different scenarios associated with different verticals. Testing interoperability and scalability of use cases, both nationally and cross-border. That is within each of the LSPs, and I don't think contractually it will be between LSPs, but inevitably that will be of an eventual requirement. Looking at user journeys and getting feedback on how was it for you in terms of the use of a wallet, and promoting the opportunities. This is going to be a massive task, promoting the benefits of the opportunities of the wallet in the public and private sector. Given the scale of what we're looking at, this is challenging. With our experience from CyberSec for Europe, where we were asked to promote the use of cybersecurity awareness within the public realm, it really is more than can be chewed off by a project. even a very large one, certainly within 2 years. So it's scratching the surface, but it has to be done, particularly for the Commission's objectives to be met. And finally, there needs to be the expertise and infrastructure to facilitate providing the EUDI wallet. So the conditions are coordinating with each other, developing national implementations in alignment with the ARF and the application of the wallet, and ensuring that the LSPs move to pre-production through testing and readiness to progress into production. So the objective of all of this is at the end of the 2 years, each of the LSPs in each of the member states will be able to say, we are ready to roll out digital identity wallets for the citizens of Europe. So no pressure there. So just winding up here a little bit, the 4 consortia. The first one is EWC, the EU Digital Identity Wallet Consortium. So they're looking at travel use cases, looking at safety and security, and the use of payments in support of travel use cases. And we're fortunate that Lal, who is going to be speaking in a few minutes, is a member of this consortium. NoBid, which is quite witty, I have to say. It's very Scandinavian to put in a proposal called NoBid, even though it does stand for Nordic Baltic EID Consortium. It's focused on 6 countries, but there are many more countries involved in this. And they are also looking at payments, both nationally and cross-border. DC4EU, the Digital Credentials for Europe, involves 43 stakeholders and 50 organizations from 23 member states, focusing on education and social security. For those who were involved in CyberSec for Europe, we had 43 beneficiaries, and that was a very large project, and about 40, possibly more associates. So each of these large-scale pilots have beneficiaries as well as associates who are involved all the way through. So an average of 60 plus for each of these LSPs. And finally, Potential, which is another good name, Pilots for European Digital Identity Wallet, a consortium working in banking, mobility, health, and administration. And they tell us they have 148 participants from 19 member states plus Ukraine. The 148 participants would include associates, though they haven't actually publicized who these beneficiaries and associates are. So there are some organizations which are involved in more than one of these pilots, but each of one of them has their own contract. Just as with the large-scale cybersecurity pilots, they will be expected to collaborate, meet with the Commission, and over the course of the next 2 years, demonstrate that they are working synergistically rather than in competition. That is my interpretation based upon the experience from the cybersecurity LSPs. So the milestones for all of this, in terms of the red line, demonstrates where we are now. So the toolbox and the ARF are being adopted and amended as we speak. The wallet procurement is ongoing, and that should be, the first draft of that should be available this quarter, end of this quarter. The pilots started on the 1st of April after the call was called early last year, and the legislative process, the trilogues are beginning, and there is an expectation that the regulation will get adopted in the second half of this year. The hope is that it'll be in October, but third quarter. But these things have a habit of slipping. So all of these things are working in parallel. Some future considerations and expectations. There is going to be no persistent unique identifier for all European citizens. So we're going to have multiple service providers, and an identifier that is unique in a service doesn't allow tracking users across different services. So this is one of the real benefits. It facilitates market and competition between service providers for identity solutions within member states and across member states. That's the second point there as well. There needs to be something that looks at the way that EIDAS 2 is regulated, is applied, and to encourage best practices. We have in the privacy area, the data protection area, we have the EDPB. So there is a suggestion to create an EUDI involving member states and the Commission, which I think is probably an inevitability. It's got to happen. And then finally, one of the things for the future, and this is way off in the future, is to look at the identity of things, how interactions will take place between connected objects. And the other future consideration is the way in which virtual worlds, such as the metaverse and others, could create the requirement for new digital identity solutions for distinguished avatars representing humans and avatar bots. That's real futuristic stuff. That isn't going to happen in the next couple of years, but somebody needs to be thinking about it and looking at the way that the EIDAS framework, maybe EIDAS 3 or EIDAS 4, would be able to incorporate them. So those are some wacky considerations to consider. So that's me finished, and I would like to hand over to Lal.
David, should we wait for questions, or should I just go ahead?
Maybe you should go ahead, and we can take questions at the end.
That's perfect. So I'll share my screen. So do you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Lal Chandran. I'm the CTO and co-founder of iGrund.io, a Swedish company based out of Stockholm. Just to give a little bit of a background about the company itself. So we are predominantly addressing the public sector and healthcare. We've been primarily funded by various innovation activities within Sweden and EU. And all the parties that you're seeing on the screen are some of the related entities that we have been working with in the last 4.5, 5 years. And we are a small company, and we also have a subsidiary back in India. In my presentation today, I will cover a bit of a background about Digital Wallet to give you a little bit of an overview. Some of you, I'm sure, is fairly familiar with digital wallets, but it's primarily to reflect on what it really means. I will also be demonstrating a couple of use cases that are enabled by digital wallets. And last but not least, I will touch upon the European Wallet Consortium activities, the EUDI wallet, ARF, and the large-scale pilot, which David mentioned, primarily to give an overview of how these are all related and where are we in terms of the maturity, etc. As David pointed out, EU has been actively promoting the use of digital wallet as part of its digital transformation journey. For example, again, something that the ADAS regulation provides a legal framework for the recognition of EIDs and signatures across member state. And the value essentially is to provide a trustworthy service that citizens can interoperably use across Europe. So to give you a little bit of a context, let me explain a typical ecosystem, where this digital wallet could actually be pulled in. So a lot of people get to believe or tend to believe that a digital wallet is purely something that the user has in his or her mobile device, while from a technology per se, that's not entirely true. A digital wallet is purely a technology stack that can be embedded in any IT system or any end user device, be it a smartphone or be it a wearable, for example, and so on. And primarily, the functionality of these wallet agents are to be able to connect to each other in a scalable manner. And once connected, they are able to expose and consume data between each other. So in the picture, there's a very, very simplified view of a typical data ecosystem. In the picture, we have the data source, data using service, and the individual carrying a smartphone, for example. And what we have shown is that a wallet agent is present in all these different entities. In the smartphone, you have a wallet application. In the data source could potentially be have deployed a wallet agent. And similarly, a data using service could also be have deployed a wallet agent. And data sources could typically be authorities, identity providers. It can be devices and sensors, or any data coming from, for example, labs. Since we've all been through the COVID times, it's like, so a COVID test certificate could be issued by a test center, and that is the data source, for example. And data using services can be, again, pretty much anything. It can be private companies, research organizations. It can be a pharmaceutical entity. It can be it can be any other data using any society at large. Basically, it's basically any entity that is consuming data, providing certain services to the individual. So this is the typical ecosystem, and our company, as such, is providing software that can easily be used by any parties that want to be part of this ecosystem. So you can see ourselves as a data intermediary services. It's a term that came in from Article 12 of the EU Data Governance Act. It's very similar to how a telecom operator really is. And my background is predominantly coming from telecom, so I'm pretty used to that concepts, etc. So the key features of a digital wallet are namely 4 or 5 of them. So one is essentially providing a secure storage and being able to share verifiable credential. So verifiable credentials are very much like a personal identification document. It can be educational certificate. It can be professional licenses. It can be pretty much anything that you want to. There's no limit to what a credential can actually be. But the assumption today is that it's definite in a way. Second aspect is the digital identity management. It is primarily to create and manage personal data, like, for example, name, context information, and use of this identity primarily is to authenticate in various contexts, like public or private services, for example. The third aspect is the privacy and security. So the belief is that these digital wallets provide better privacy and security because individuals are pretty much holding that information at any given point of time, and they are actively providing that against a certain terms and conditions or data agreements, for example. Some of the privacy features that are enabled include, for example, selective disclosure of data. So if you look at any, say, current systems out there, I would call them as a full disclosure of data systems. So for example, if somebody is, if you're giving access to something, it's like providing access to everything that a particular company's API provides. In the case of digital wallets, you're selectively be able to share. For example, you just have to, you may want to share only your name in certain contexts. Another interesting privacy aspect is also For example, it's called the zero knowledge proof system. For example, if you're going to a pub and they want to check whether you are about 20, so they don't necessarily need to know your date of birth, etc. They just need to know the fact that you're actually about 20. So that is like a mechanism that is built in most of the digital wallets today. The fourth aspect is interoperability with other digital wallets and IT management system to share credentials seamlessly. And the last point is essentially all about compliance with standards and regulations. For example, in the EU, we have the GDPR. And how do we ensure that every personal data transaction that happens is compliant to all the articles that are pertaining to GDPR? And from an organization point of view, how can an organization be on the safe side of law when they are consuming data? So a typical digital wallet use case scenario involves few terminologies. So let me quickly go through that. There is a data source, as I mentioned before. It can also be another term that is often used is an issuer, or there could be a data producer. There's a data wallet, which is the holder of any data, or it can even be carried by an individual. And then there is a data using service, which is another terminology, is a verifier of the data, and there is a data consumer. So any data that is issued by a data user, a data source, or a data producer is notifying the individual, and the individual is able to store it in an encrypted way in their digital wallets. And when they store it, they also can check whether what they are receiving is authentic and not tampered in transit, for example. And then finally, the individual once is able to share that information to a third party. That third party is also able to independently verify the authenticity of the data as well as the authenticity of the authenticity of the data source that the data is originating from. So it's all integrity check-in built in the whole data transition. And this verification could be based on a trust anchor, that could be a ledger or a non-ledger. Just a quick advertisement about what Vagrant offers is essentially a backend infrastructure that provides this kind of what we call as an active data exchange, where the individual is involved in the activity in the transaction, and a passive data exchange infrastructure where individual is passively acknowledging or consenting or agreeing to information exchange between two organizations, in this case, organization A and B. And on the right side is all the SaaS offering that we have within the services, starting with the regulatory compliance with the consent management solution. We provide end-to-end verification services. So any company receiving data, we provide a single point to easily onboard to a verification environment, etc. We also provide a concept called data pods. That is like a new technology that's emerging based on a protocol called Solid. So that provides a mechanism for end users, for example, to put everything into a own data space or the database itself that is only containing his or her data, and you can pretty much share that information with anybody. So we have a system where all the things that I know in iGrant data wallet can be backed up and restored from a data pod, for example. And of course, you can also use a data pod for any other application that is supporting the same protocol. And last but not least, we also provide ample support to digital wallets and SDKs, primarily to any businesses or any app company that want to embrace this new concept. So before I go ahead, let me quickly demonstrate a couple of use cases and give you context to it. So on the screen that you see, I have I'm going to tell you a demo page. On the left side is my mobile phone with an application, with a data wallet application, which has a digital wallet agent that is embedded within it. And as you can see, I've already had a bunch of credentials that are already onboarded into the digital wallet. And these are all pretty much real, starting with my passport, for example, in a digital format, and then boarding passes and so on. And on the right side, I have a demo environment to showcase a bunch of use cases. So let me start with a scenario where I'm traveling. I'm traveling abroad, and since we are all used to the COVID season, so one of the typical requirements is that you need to be You need to show that you need to show proof that you are COVID negative, in which case you have to go to a test center. So imagine myself going to a test center, and the first thing you do in the registration desk is to connect to the registration entity and say that, okay, here I've registered myself into your system. So you can see that I've connected here. So what has happened here is that my digital wallet has connected into an IT system that is coming from a test center. And once connected, the test center is able to see, without any additional thing, they can pretty much issue me a COVID negative certificate, for example. So that is the issue thing that I showed in the previous slide. So as you can see, I received a notification on the left side on my digital wallet. So you can see that that is presented to me as a data agreement, where I have information that is coming from a test center based out of Stockholm, Sweden. And there's a bunch of data that actually has been issued by the test center. And then there's also a data agreement policy, which provides me with a complete detail of what kind of compliance is carried out, or what are the various compliance related things that are being put in. In this case, for example, what is the purpose description, what's a lawful base of processing, and a bunch of other parameters that are regulatory wise important. And then I can also see a signature on the very bottom, which says that this is like a untampered data point that is coming from a test center, which is signed and acknowledged by the test center. And once I'm happy with the whole information that has been presented to me, I accept to store the credential in my wallet. So this wallet now contains my my test certificate. So let me see. Yeah, this is no, this is not the right one. So let me. Yeah, I think this one. I have a bit of. I've been demonstrating this. So there's a few many of them. Yeah, this is the one which has been issued right now, 25th of April. So now imagine myself going to an airport, and in the check-in desk, they want to check or they demand the COVID negative certificates among other documents, for example. Once again, there's a QR code, and this QR code could pretty much be replaced by a NFC blip device, for example, in which case you'll be just tapping on the NFC blip device, and I'm scanning the QR code, and once again, a data agreement pops up. And the reason why you see like 3 dots here is because there are multiple certificates existing in my wallet today. So you can see that one that is issued right now, and then one that is issued on 30th of April, and then 20th of April, for example. So I'm going to share the latest one that has been issued to me. And once again, you can see the data agreement policy. In this case, it's coming from a travel company based out of Stockholm, Sweden. And once I'm happy with the data agreement policies, I exchange that information, and the travel company in this case is receiving the data. In this case, they have requested for my name, the data in which the test was done, and the test result. I'm also able to see on my wallet, I'm also able to see what kind of information has been shared. So in this case, you can see that 20 seconds ago, I shared to a travel company based out of Sweden, the name test result, and exactly it's like the auditability feature that is built in the digital wallet. And you can also see the agreement that has been signed, and the very bottom you can see like there are 2 signatures, one signed by the test center and then countersigned by me as an individual, saying that I'm actually consenting or agreeing to the data transaction depending on the lawful base of processing. So that's like the one end-to-end demo of the entire flow. And just before I go to the next use case, you can also see something called a ledger network. So in my slide, you saw a trust anchor. So in this case, we're using a ledger-based trust anchor, and there are like a bunch of different trust anchors we support already today. The European Blockchain Service Infrastructure is one of them, and then you have a bunch of infrastructures that are based on Hyperledger Indy technology, and pretty much you can switch between these services. In my second demo, I'm going to show you a demonstration of a passport data. So in this case, so in the first demo, what you saw is like it's relying on an end-to-end issue and verification system that is purely based on a new ledger-based system. And what I'm going to show now is a scenario where you can even support a existing mechanism, for example, a passport that is based on a PKI infrastructure or a certificate authority infrastructure. So you can see that on my digital wallet on the left side, you can see my passport with my headshot and my signature that has been copied over to my wallet via an NFC based reading. And as long as your passport is supporting NFC, you can do it yourself and try it out yourself. And in the shared passport data, I'm asked to, there's a QR code that has been presented to me. So this QR code is formulated using the iGrant platform. So in this case, a travel company is configuring itself and say that I want to check whether you are, what's your name and whether you're of a certain age, for example, just to give you an example. And I'm scanning the QR code, and once again, a data agreement pops up, and I can see that it's been requesting again from a travel company, and I've been asked to share my first name and the birth date. And now the data is coming from my passport, digital copy of my passport, and being supplied to the travel company. And similarly, you can even exchange your headshot, for example. In this case, you can see that it's requesting my signature and my headshot, and the image get transferred to the travel company. And once again, you can see, if you look at the travel company log, you can see the MyShare data, and you can see all the different transactions that has happened. So if you look at 11 seconds ago, yeah, this is the last transaction that happened. And if there's any kind of dispute, you can challenge it, and an independent verification is possible because of the cryptographic signatures that are embedded within the signed and countersigned data agreement. So that's very much my demo. So just to summarize my demo itself. So in my first example, I had a test center as a data source issuing a data, which has been received and saved in the data wallet, and then shared it with the travel company. In my second example, I had a passport that has been based on an X509 base certificate keys that have been shared with the data wallet. And when it was added to the data wallet, the signature was verified and ensured that it's a valid passport. And then it's used to exchange to a third party, such as a travel company, for example. So now I'll go on and talk a little bit about the EUDI wallet and the consortium activities that's been created. So as David pointed out, it's a new element in the regulation, in the EDIS regulation, and the goal is to create a common legislative and technical requirement for European identity wallet, which is primarily to enable user to store and present electronic attestation of attributes. So everything that you saw is an electronic attestation, for example. Another terminology is verifiable credential, and it's primarily to access services online and sign or seal a document electronically. And the key principle is that it's available to any citizen. It's voluntary in nature, and it's widely usable for identification or to even share any personal attributes across public and private and digital services. And we as a company has taken the whole concept beyond conventional data and even extended to healthcare, for example, where we are working on a solution to say even to provide remote patient monitoring with complete auditability of every data that actually is transacted. And last but not least, the principle is to give full control to users to choose which aspect of the data is being shared by whom, and they're able to keep track of and revoke access at any given point of time. This is a image that has been borrowed from the EU website. A typical use case is, say, for example, today, if you want to apply for a bank loan, etc., the whole process is very cumbersome, and it requires you to take everything in a paper format or a PDF format, etc. And then there's a bunch of things that actually is going through. And there's no real easy mechanism for bank to really verify the authenticity of what we are producing, for example. So it takes a little bit of a time from a bank point of view to approve a particular bank loan. And with the use of digital wallet technologies, it becomes extremely easy. The moment you present these things as a verifiable credentials or electronic attestation, it can be verified immediately, even at the attribute level, and thereby a transaction can actually be validated in few minutes or even seconds, for example. And that makes it extremely easy from an end user point of view. And it also provides a complete visibility from an end user point of view to also track any kind of information that has been exchanged, because the data agreement, concept of data agreement, have a fully auditable service that can actually be even potentially even challenged in the court of law. The consortium, David already touched upon it. The primary aim of the consortium is to apply the digital wallet technology into various large-scale pilot use cases, looking at travel, payments, and last but not least, the organizational digital identity. And that's a point I was trying to make earlier. Digital wallet is not just for end users. It can also be, or individuals, it can also be for organizations, such as, for example, a legal identifier or a legal so the proof that I'm actually a owner of a company, etc., could actually be in a organizational digital identity wallet, for a digital wallet, for example. And on the right side is pretty much showing the entire coverage of the EWC consortium. It's pretty much the entire Europe, I mean, put it that way. There are 5 packages over 24 months period, and our contribution is predominantly in work package 3, which is all about wallets. And there's concepts like PID and ODI. PID is like a personal identification document, whereas ODI is organizational document identifier, etc. And all we provide is the technology stack for the rest of the work packages to trial it in real life. And the work package 2 is where the use cases are itself defined, which will actually be piloted with a bunch of with a set of end users. This is like I just want to talk about ARF, or the Architectural Reference Framework. So what you saw me presenting is based on a technology architecture before the Architectural Reference Framework was formulated. So the Architectural Reference Framework is formulated to pretty much to enhance the governance in when you use a digital wallet infrastructure, which also qualifies certain issues, qualified certain provider, etc., in a highly governed manner, and which with trusted lists, etc., which is extremely valuable when you're talking about a trustworthy ecosystem. And what we are doing as we speak in the next 24 months is to ensure that these concepts are further developed and embraced on in the digital wallet implementation that we have already embarked on. So mostly we will be adding on new functions and supporting the credential profiles, if I may put it that way, in our digital wallets going forward, and ensuring that the large-scale pilot use cases can be demonstrated in a end-to-end way, and also even rolled out for end-user feedback. And some of these terminologies that are coming from the ARF is shown on the screen. I'm not going to read out all these things, but these are like some of the key terms that has been introduced by the ARF. And these are essentially, as I said, is to make it more trustworthy and and to make governance easier than what it is today. You also have a bunch of references. Feel free to check it out yourself. We also have a demo video. Feel free to download our iGrant digital wallets. And if you have any feedback or questions, feel free to contact me or David anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lal. That was very comprehensive, and I like the demo. So we've got a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to put to either Lal or to myself? No?
Maybe I can break the ice. Thank you for, I mean, I have so many questions. So one of it was, 2 of them are related to Lal's presentation. So, you know, when you present that, that user interface on data agreement, yeah. So there I see that it is necessary that all the service provider that use the wallet, they provide their agreements in a standard format.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's also a limitation, right?
Well, see, what we did is that, yeah, that's this is an observation we had when we began to embrace these kind of things. When I'm presented something, typically what you're doing is that you're accepting certain terms. And quite often it's almost impossible to understand what that really terms means, right? So what we did as part of one of the projects that we have been involved in like some 3 years ago is to introduce a concept called data agreement. So we formulated a machine readable format that is, as we speak, it's getting standardized by ISO 560. And that is precisely defining how a typical data agreement should actually be looking like across the board.
Mm.
So, and what we did is that we embedded that whole thing in a way that is not intruding with a normal user experience. So it's like, you know, at the same time, it's providing a concise definition. What we also did is that from an organization point of view, the question is that how do you really formulate this data agreement, right? So what we did is that we introduced a concept of attaching the whole data agreement process, the onboarding of data agreement process, while you're defining the consumption or exposing of data, you carry out what you call as a DPIA, data protection impact assessment. So the outcome of the DPIA today, for example, is a very cumbersome, like a document basically. But what we did is that we put in all the information that is relevant from a machine readable data agreement per se. And so the data agreement is actually the result of a translation of a typical DPA document or typical DPA report, basically. So that's how we formulated the whole thing.
Okay.
We even integrated the whole thing. Like when you carry out a DPA with some of the a finished provider, for example, it automatically generates the DPIA in a machine readable format that can be onboarded into iGram platform straight away. And it takes like a few seconds to really create a data agreement via DPIA, basically.
Okay, interesting. I had a different assumption around the agreement. I didn't see the DPIA was the source of that. But also like connecting to DPIA, maybe I thought maybe DPIAs are more, if not confidential, but close to confidential assessments that are not there for public consumption. But yeah, this doesn't matter. I think it's a design choice.
Yeah, at the end of the day, DPA, what you do is that you're actually figuring out the legal basis or lawful basis of using in-person data, right? So yes, it's confidential when it comes to a large part of it, but then there are certain part of it which you actually want to be transparent about towards end users and towards everybody else. So that transparency is what we bring into the table. So, and that is inbuilt within the workflow of a digital wallet technology. So what happens is that once you have like formulated the whole thing as a data agreement, you also have an option to provide a privacy dashboard towards individuals. So where individuals are able to see, instead of really having like a 20, 30 pages, say code of conduct or privacy terms and conditions, you actually provides a bunch of data agreements where people can actually see the exact purpose and even, and it doesn't necessarily need to be based on consent.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question for you, Lau, from Mark, which is what kind of zero knowledge proof are we using?
So we are using what is called as an encrypt space. There's a signature called BBS Plus. So that's the technology we are using today. And it is still an area that is getting developed. So we need to see how the European Commission and the European initiatives are, what kind of ZKP is really being promoted in the consortium, for example.
Mark says thank you. Thank you for your question, Mark. Are there any other questions from anyone? I see that it's exactly 4 o'clock Central Time. If there are no more questions, you're welcome. We will make the slides available, and the session was recorded, so you'll be able to follow what we've said, and also obviously Lal's demos when we make the recording available online. So thank you for joining. We hope to have another webinar like this on the subject of the digital identity wallets from one of the other participants, beneficiaries in one or two of the other pilots, maybe in the next month or two. So look out for that. So meanwhile, thank you again, Lal, for participating, and thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.